In the sun-scorched plains of Oklahoma, a storm is brewing. The infamous Red Steel Brotherhood, a savage motorcycle gang known for leaving nothing but destruction in their wake, has set their sights on what seems to be an easy target, a modest family farm on the outskirts of Broken Arrow. They're about to make the worst mistake of their lives. What they see as a vulnerable homestead is actually the fortress of Marcus "Shadow" Reynolds, one of the most decorated Delta Force commanders in Special Operations history. For 2 decades, he was the military's go-to man for impossible missions, a ghost who turned hostile territory into his personal hunting ground. This isn't just another home invasion gone wrong. This is the story of how 20 hardened criminals learned that they didn't raid a farm. They trespassed on the domain of a man who spent his life mastering the art of transforming enemies' advantages into their worst nightmares. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the Oklahoma plains as Marcus Reynolds walked the perimeter of his farmland, an old habit he couldn't shake, even after 5 years of civilian life. The morning dew dampened his boots as he moved with the measured pace of a man who had learned to find peace in routine. His calloused hands, once used for handling weapons in far-off war zones, now tended to the cornstalks that stretched toward the horizon. From the farmhouse porch, his 17-year-old daughter Sarah watched him with knowing eyes. She'd grown accustomed to her father's morning ritual, understanding it was as much about security as it was about checking the crops. "Dad?" she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "Tom called. He's running late with the new irrigation parts." Marcus nodded, a slight smile softening his weathered features. Tom Bradley had been more than just his communications specialist in Delta Force. He'd become family over the years. Now, as his farmhand, Tom helped maintain their slice of paradise while keeping an eye on things that most people wouldn't notice. Inside the kitchen, Sarah poured coffee into her father's favorite mug, a chipped Marine Corps cup that had survived 3 continents. The morning light caught the silver streaks in Marcus's dark hair as he entered, his movement still carrying the fluid grace of a predator, though he tried to hide it. "How's the science project coming along?" he asked, genuine interest mixing with the underlying alertness that never quite left his eyes. "Almost done," Sarah replied, pulling up a chair. "Mr. Henderson says it might win first place at the state fair." She paused, studying her father's face. Mom would have loved to see it. The mention of Mary brought a familiar ache to Marcus's chest, but he pushed through it with practiced ease. 3 years had passed since the accident, and he'd learned to focus on the joy in Sarah's achievements rather than the absence of his wife's smile. The sound of Tom's truck rattling up the gravel driveway broke the moment. Marcus's posture shifted imperceptibly, a subtle tell that Sarah had learned to recognize. Tom wasn't one to change routine without reason. The screen door creaked as Tom entered, his face carrying the tight expression of a man with unwelcome news. "Marcus," he said, nodding to Sarah before turning to his old commander, "we need to talk about what I saw in town." Sarah recognized the look that passed between the 2 men. It was the same one they shared whenever their past life threatened to intrude on their carefully constructed peace. She'd seen it more frequently lately, ever since rumors of the Red Steel Brotherhood began circulating through Broken Arrow. "The usual spot?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the barn. To anyone else, it would look like 2 farmers discussing the day's work. But Sarah knew better. The barn wasn't just storage for equipment. It housed her father's contingencies, the preparations he'd made for the day his past might catch up with them. As the men walked away, Sarah watched through the window, remembering her father's words from years ago. "Peace isn't the absence of danger, sweetheart. It's the strength to face it when it comes." Looking at the distant highway, where dust clouds sometimes signaled approaching motorcycles. She wondered if that strength would soon be tested. Marcus and Tom disappeared into the barn, their silhouettes merging with the shadows of machinery and stored hay bales. Above them, hidden cameras tracked every movement along the property's boundaries, silent sentinels that most visitors mistook for ordinary security measures. But like everything else on the Reynolds farm, there was more to them than met the eye. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another beautiful day in Oklahoma. But beneath the tranquil surface of swaying corn and gentle breezes, preparations were already being made for a storm that both men could feel approaching. One that would soon test every lesson learned in their decades of combat experience. That night, Marcus sat alone in his study, a room that betrayed little of his military past, save for a single photograph tucked in the corner of his desk. The image showed a younger version of himself, standing beside Mary outside their newly purchased farm. Her smile had always been his anchor, the reason he'd come back from each mission. His fingers traced the worn edges of a leather-bound journal, his mission log from that final operation in Kurdistan. The memories flooded back unbidden. The whisper of helicopter blades, the weight of his equipment, Tom's voice crackling through the comm with last-minute intelligence. It had been supposed to be straightforward, extract a high-value target from hostile territory. Instead, they'd walked into an ambush that cost 3 good men their lives. "Dad?" Sarah's voice pulled him from the past. She stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea, a habit she'd inherited from her mother. "You're thinking about that night again, aren't you?" Marcus accepted the cup, gesturing for her to sit. "Your mother always knew when I was dwelling, too." He paused, studying his daughter's face, so much like Mary's. "She'd say I was carrying shadows that needed light." "Tell me about the accident," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't the first time she'd asked, but something in her tone was different tonight. "The real story this time." Marcus set down his cup, weighing his words carefully. "The official report says it was a brake failure on the mountain road." His jaw tightened. "But your mother never took risks driving. She triple-checked everything, especially in bad weather." Sarah leaned forward. "And the missing investigation files?" "You've been digging." It wasn't a question. Pride mixed with concern in his voice. "Local police said the files were corrupted. Too convenient, if you ask me." The security system's subtle chime interrupted them. Motion detected at the far end of the property. Marcus moved to his computer, checking the camera feeds. A familiar sense of alertness crept through his muscles as he scanned the screens. 3 years ago," he continued, eyes still on the monitors, "I started noticing patterns, strange vehicles in town, questions about the farm from people who didn't quite fit. Your mother's accident happened 2 days after she reported suspicious. Motorcycles parked outside her office." Sarah's breath caught. "The Brotherhood." No proof. Marcus's voice carried the weight of countless operations. "But I installed every security measure on this farm for a reason. The safe room behind the pantry, the cached supplies, the escape routes. They're not just paranoia from my Delta days." He stood, moving to a seemingly ordinary bookshelf. With practiced ease, he pressed a hidden catch, revealing a small arsenal behind the false back. "Your mother made me promise to leave the past behind, to give you a normal life. But she also made me promise to keep you safe, no matter what." Sarah watched as her father checked the weapons with mechanical precision. "The cameras Tom installed last month, they're military grade, aren't they? Top of the line. We've got eyes on every approach, thermal imaging, and motion sensors that can tell the difference between a coyote and a human." He paused, looking at his daughter. "The farm isn't just our home, Sarah. It's a fortress designed by someone who spent 20 years learning how to protect what matters most." Outside, the wind carried the distant rumble of motorcycles, too far to trigger the sensors, but close. Enough to remind them both that trouble was brewing. Marcus closed the hidden compartment, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Mom would be proud of you," Sarah said softly, "of how you've handled everything." Marcus smiled, but his eyes remained alert. "She'd be prouder of you. You've got her strength, her ability to see through the smoke screens people put up." He checked his watch, another habit from his operational days. "It's late, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." As Sarah headed to bed, Marcus returned to the security feeds. In the distance, the motorcycle sounds faded, but he knew better than to relax. Years of combat experience had taught him that the quiet moments were often preludes to the storm. Somewhere out there, the Red Steel Brotherhood was making plans of their own, unaware that they were dealing with a man who had turned deadlier ground than Oklahoma farmland into his personal battleground. The Red Steel Brotherhood's compound sat like a festering wound on the outskirts of Tulsa, a sprawling collection of warehouses and makeshift buildings surrounded by a sea of motorcycles. Inside the main warehouse, Jake the Snake Callahan studied, a map spread across a scarred wooden table, his weathered face illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. "Reynolds' farm sits on 500 acres, he growled, tracing the property lines with a nicotine-stained finger. "Perfect location for our expansion." Around him, 24 Brotherhood members lounged on worn furniture, their leather cuts bearing the gang's bloody insignia, a crimson sword wrapped in barbed wire. Diesel, his second-in-command, stepped forward. Fresh scars crossed his face, souvenirs from their last territorial expansion. "What about the old man? Jenkins' crew says he's just some ex-military type playing farmer." Callahan's laugh was cold as steel. "Military don't mean shit out here. Ask the Peterson family how their Marine Corps daddy helped them." The room filled with dark chuckles. Everyone remembered how the Petersons' farm had burned last month. "Something's different about this one, boss," a voice called from the back. Mike Razor Torres, their scout, pushed through the crowd. "Been watching the place. Guys got cameras everywhere, not your regular farm security setup." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "You get made?" "Negative. But," Razor hesitated, "his farmhand runs security sweeps like a pro. They're both ex-military, but not your regular grunts." The gang leader stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the map. "Don't matter what they were. We're 30 strong. They're 2 men and a teenage girl." He pointed to markers on the map. The Williams place fell in 2 days, the Hendersons in 3. By the end of the week, Reynolds' farm joins our territory. Outside, engines roared to life as a patrol group prepared for their next drive-by. Callahan moved to the window, watching his men mount their bikes. The setting sun glinted off chrome and steel, painting the scene in blood-red hues. "Boss," Diesel approached, holding a file. "Got something interesting from our friend at the sheriff's office. 3 years ago, Reynolds' wife died in a car accident up in the mountains. File's been sealed ever since." A cruel smile spread across Callahan's face. "Sealed files mean secrets. Secrets mean leverage." He turned to his assembled men. "Tonight, we send a message, 4 bikes, full colors. Ride past the farm, nice and slow. Let them see us. Let them feel what's coming." As the chosen riders thundered out of the compound, Callahan returned to the map. His fingers traced the route from the Brotherhood's territory to Reynolds' farm. In his mind, he could already see it burning. Another conquest in the Brotherhood's expanding empire. "One more thing, boss," Razor added, his voice low. "Guy's name is Marcus Reynolds. Call sign Shadow back in the service." Something flickered in Callahan's eyes, recognition, perhaps even a hint of concern, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Shadow, huh?" He pulled out a lighter, flicking it open and closed. "Well, let's see how this Shadow handles real." Fire! The rumble of returning motorcycles drew their attention. The patrol group's leader burst in, his face pale beneath his beard. "Boss, you need to see this." He handed over a phone showing surveillance footage. Reynolds was ready for us. Caught every angle of our ride-by on military-grade cameras. Bastard even had infrared running. Callahan studied the footage, his expression darkening. This wasn't the standard security of a paranoid farmer. This was professional, tactical, the work of someone who understood true threats. Change of plans, he announced, crushing out his cigarette. We hit them hard, hit them fast. No more warnings, no more games. He turned to his assembled crew, his voice carrying the promise of violence. Tomorrow night, we remind everyone in Broken Arrow why they call us the Red Steel Brotherhood. And this shadow, he's about to learn that out here. We're the only ones who get to play with fear. As night fell over Oklahoma, two forces prepared for an inevitable clash. At the Brotherhood's compound, bikes were checked, weapons loaded, and plans finalized. And on a quiet farm, motion sensors tracked every movement along the perimeter, while inside, a former Delta Force commander waited, knowing that sometimes the deadliest predator is the one that looks like prey. The fluorescent lights of Miller's General Store cast harsh shadows across the aisles as Sarah Reynolds picked up supplies for the farm. Her father's list was specific: rope, wire, and other innocuous items she knew would serve dual purposes. The bell above the door chimed, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Three men in leather cuts, emblazoned with the Red Steel Brotherhood's insignia, swaggered in. Their boots echoed against the linoleum as they spread out through the store. The largest one, his face marked by a jagged scar, locked eyes with Sarah and smiled. "Well, look what we have here," he drawled, moving closer. "You're Reynolds, a girl, ain't you?" His breath reeked of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. Sarah's hand slipped into her pocket, pressing the panic button on the modified phone her father had given her. She kept her voice steady, channeling her father's calm. "I'm just here for supplies." Funny thing about supplies, the scarred man, Diesel, leaned against the shelf. "Your daddy's gonna need a lot more than rope when we're done with that. Farm of yours." The store's owner, old Bill Miller, reached for his phone. One of the bikers blocked his path, knocking the device away. "Stay out of this, old man." The bell chimed again. Marcus Reynolds stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small store. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, positioning himself with clear lines of sight to all three men. His voice was soft, almost conversational. "Sarah, go start the truck." "But Dad..." "Now, sweetheart." She moved toward the door. The bikers, watching her exit. Diesel straightened up, trying to use his height advantage. "Just having a friendly chat with your girl, Reynolds. No harm done. 3 grown men intimidating a teenage girl." Marcus's eyes were cold. "Is that what passes for courage in the Brotherhood these days?" Diesel's face darkened. "You trying to start something, old man?" Marcus stepped closer, his movement so subtle that Diesel didn't realize he was now perfectly positioned to control any potential attack. "I'm trying to prevent something, so listen carefully." His voice dropped lower, meant only for Diesel's ears. "I know 16 ways to end you without making a sound. Right now, I'm giving you a choice. Walk away. Tell Callahan that this farm and my daughter are off limits." "Or what?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Or I start teaching your Brotherhood those 16 ways, one body at a time." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty of a man who had dealt death in the darkest corners of the world, made Diesel step back. "This ain't over, Reynolds." "It can be." Marcus remained motionless as the bikers backed toward the door. "But that's your choice to make." Once they were gone, Marcus turned to Bill. "You okay?" The old store owner nodded, hands shaking slightly as he picked up his phone. "Jesus, Marcus, those weren't regular troublemakers." No, they weren't. Marcus gathered Sarah's abandoned supplies, adding extra ammunition to the order. "Bill, you might want to take that fishing trip you've been talking about. Things are about to get complicated around here." Outside, Sarah waited in the truck, her face a mask of controlled anger. As Marcus climbed in, she spoke. They knew about Mom, the way they talked, Dad. They knew something. Marcus started the engine, his mind already racing through preparations. I know, sweetheart, which means we're done playing defense. He pulled out his phone, dialing Tom. Time to remind them why they called me Shadow. As they drove home, 3 motorcycles followed at a distance. Marcus noted their positions, their riding patterns, the way they communicated with hand signals. Every detail fed into the tactical computer in his mind that had never quite shut off after leaving the service. They'll come tonight, Sarah said. Not a question. No. Marcus checked his mirrors. They'll spend today watching, planning. Callahan won't risk a night attack until he knows the layout. He glanced at his daughter. Which gives us time to get you to Aunt Claire's. Dad, I can help. You can help by being safe. His tone softened. Your mother made me promise, Sarah. Some promises you don't break. Back at the farm, Tom was waiting, his truck loaded with supplies. One look at Marcus's face told him everything. How bad? They made it personal. Marcus popped the trunk, revealing his old mission gear. Time to wake up the farm, Tom. Full protocol. As Sarah packed her bags and Tom began activating their more specialized security measures, Marcus stood on the porch, watching the distant dust clouds from the Brotherhood's bikes. In his mind, the farm was already transforming from a homestead into a battlefield. Every barn, every field, every hidden cache of equipment would serve a purpose. The storm was coming. But this time, Marcus Reynolds wasn't just protecting a mission objective. He was protecting his home, his daughter, and maybe, finally, a chance to uncover the truth about Mary's death. The Brotherhood was about to learn why even retired predators still have teeth. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farmland as Marcus helped Sarah load her bags into Tom's truck. Each movement was measured, precise, the actions of a man buying time to memorize his daughter's face just in case. I've got the sat phone, Sarah said, holding up the secure device, and Aunt Claire's panic room is prepped, just like we practiced. She paused, studying her father's expression. This isn't like our other drills, is it? Marcus pulled her into a tight embrace. No, sweetheart, it's not. When he stepped back, his eyes were those of the operator he'd once been, alert, calculating, already mapping out scenarios. If I don't make contact every 6 hours, emergency protocol. I remember. She clutched a small locket, her mother's, that hung around her neck. Dad, if they really had something to do with Mom, then we'll find out. He squeezed her shoulder. But first, we make sure you're safe. Tom approached, his rifle, bag slung casually over one shoulder as if he were heading to a regular hunting trip. Perimeter sensors are hot. Added a few surprises in the south field, too. He gave Sarah a quick hug. Don't worry, kid. Your old man and I have handled worse odds. As the truck disappeared down the dusty road, Marcus allowed himself one moment of pure, unfiltered emotion. Fear, rage, love, all compressed into a single breath. Then, like slipping on an old uniform, the warrior mindset took over. He moved through the farm with practiced efficiency, checking weapons caches and communication equipment. The barn's interior had been transformed. Farm tools now doubled as improvised weapons, strategically placed near entry points. The hayloft concealed a sniper's nest with clear lines of sight to all approaches. In the kitchen, Marcus prepared a final cup of coffee, savoring the mundane task. The setting sun painted the room in amber hues, reminding him of quiet evenings with Mary. She'd understood him better than anyone, recognized the constant vigilance that lurked beneath his farmer's facade. Proximity alert. Tom's voice crackled through the encrypted radio. 2 bikes, western approach, looked like scouts. Marcus moved to his command center, a converted root cellar filled with surveillance monitors. The thermal imaging showed The heat signatures of two motorcycles moving slowly along the property line, testing responses, looking for blind spots. "Let them look," Marcus murmured, switching between camera feeds. "Let them think they're in control." The phone rang. Sarah, checking in from the first waypoint. "We're clear, Dad. No tails." She hesitated. "I found something in Mom's old papers. A name. Operation Crossfire." Marcus's blood ran cold. That operation had been classified, a mission that had gone sideways in ways that still haunted him. Where did she... It was in her work files, Dad. The ones from right before the accident. The pieces were starting to align, forming a picture that made his tactical mind race. "Stay safe, sweetheart. I'll contact you at the next check-in." As darkness fell, Marcus and Tom made their final preparations. The farm's power was rerouted through backup generators, critical systems hardened against attack. Every approach was covered, every angle considered. "Just like Damascus," Tom said, checking his weapon, "except this time we know the ground." Marcus nodded, remembering that hellish week in Syria. "This time, it's our territory." He studied the thermal feeds one last time. More bikes were gathering at the Brotherhood's compound, heat signatures clustering like angry wasps. "They'll come at dawn. They think it gives them the advantage." Little do they know. Tom grinned, the expression fierce in the monitor's glow. Dawn was always your favorite time to hunt. The night settled over the farm like a heavy blanket. In the distance, crickets fell silent as more scouts prowled the perimeter. Marcus Reynolds stood in his darkened home, every sense attuned to the environment he'd spent years preparing for exactly this kind of fight. Tomorrow, the Brotherhood would learn that this quiet farm was more than just a retirement project. It was a fortress, designed by a man who'd made a career of turning enemy territory into killing grounds. And as the first stars appeared in the Oklahoma sky, Marcus whispered a quiet promise to Mary. "Time to find out what really happened, love. Time to make things right." The first rays of dawn had barely touched the horizon when the rumble of motorcycles shattered the morning calm. Through his thermal scope, Marcus counted 20 bikes approaching in formation, their riders armed for war. Callahan led the column, his massive frame unmistakable even at distance. "Right on schedule," Tom's voice crackled through the radio from his position in the converted grain silo. "Got eyes on 4 more trying to flank through the south field." Marcus watched the Brotherhood, spread out along his fence line, their confidence evident in their casual movements. They didn't bother with stealth. This was about intimidation, about showing force. "Let's welcome them properly." Marcus keyed his radio twice, activating the first set of surprises. The leading bikes crashed through the front gate, tearing across the gravel driveway toward the farmhouse. Callahan's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Reynolds, last chance to walk away with your life." Marcus remained silent, watching through his cameras as the gang fanned out across his property. They began their show of force, smashing windows in the greenhouse, shooting up farm equipment, their whoops and hollers echoing across the fields. The first bike reached the barn. As its rider dismounted, a pressure plate clicked softly. The explosion wasn't lethal. Marcus had carefully calculated the charge, but it sent the biker flying backward, his motorcycle crashing into 2 others. Chaos erupted as the Brotherhood realized this wasn't going to be a simple intimidation raid. "South team is moving," Tom reported, "taking the shot." A precise rifle crack rang out. One of the flanking bikers dropped, clutching his shoulder. Non-lethal, but the message was clear. They were dealing with professionals. Callahan's voice roared over the confusion. "It's one man! Spread out and find this bastard!" Marcus smiled grimly. Time to educate them. He triggered the farm's speaker system, his voice emerging from hidden locations across the property. "You're trespassing on private property. This is your final warning. Show yourself, Reynolds." Callahan fired his shotgun at one of the speakers. "Or we start burning everything." "You really should have done your homework," Marcus's voice echoed from a different location. Ask yourselves why they called me Shadow. The irrigation system suddenly burst to life, but instead of water, they sprayed a dense cloud of fertilizer and mineral oil into the air. Visibility dropped to 0 in seconds. In the confusion, more pressure plates triggered, sending bikers sprawling. "I can't see shit," someone screamed. Motorcycles revved blindly, some colliding in the artificial fog. Through his thermal scope, Marcus watched them stumble around, their heat signatures bright against the cool morning air. He triggered another set of charges, flashbangs this time, perfectly placed to disorient without killing. "Boss, this ain't right," Diesel's voice carried across the chaos. "He's playing with us." "Spread out," Callahan ordered, but his authority was cracking. "Find the house, burn it down." Marcus keyed his radio. "Tom, 4 more down," Tom reported calmly. "Non-lethal. They're clustering by the cornfield." "Good." Marcus moved silently through his prepared routes between buildings, heard them toward the barn. Time for Phase 2. The Brotherhood was learning fast that their usual tactics, overwhelming force and intimidation, meant nothing here. Every attempt to regroup was met with precise fire or new obstacles. The farm they'd thought would be an easy target had become a labyrinth of traps and invisible threats. "Reynolds!" Callahan's voice held a new edge of desperation. "You think this changes anything? We know about Operation Crossfire. We know what happened to your wife." Marcus froze for a split second. Through his scope, he watched Callahan spin around, trying to locate any response. The gang leader wasn't just taunting, he knew something specific. "Tom, keep them contained. I'm going to have a chat with the boss." "Copy that, Shadow." Happy hunting. As the morning sun climbed higher, the Brotherhood's invasion had turned into a nightmare. Their superior numbers meant nothing against an invisible opponent who seemed to predict their every move. And somewhere in the chaos, a Delta Force operator was closing in on the man who might finally reveal the truth about his wife's death. Marcus moved like his old call sign, a shadow among shadows, decades of combat experience focused into a single purpose. The Brotherhood was about to learn that they hadn't invaded a farm. They'd walked into a trap laid by a man who'd spent his life perfecting the art of hunting other men. The artificial fog was beginning to clear, revealing the chaos Marcus had created. Overturned motorcycles littered the farm's entrance, while disoriented Brotherhood members nursed various non-lethal wounds. Through his thermal scope, Marcus tracked 2 scouts who'd separated from the main group, creeping along the edge of the cornfield. "I've got movement in the barn," Tom's voice whispered through the radio. 3 heat signatures, 2nd level." "Copy that." Marcus moved silently through the rows of corn, his boots finding the exact spots he'd mentally marked during countless practice runs. "Keep an eye on Callahan. He's too quiet." The scouts ahead were moving cautiously now, their earlier bravado replaced by genuine fear. Marcus could hear their harsh whispers carried on the morning breeze. "This is bullshit, man." The first one, "Oh," hissed. "Did you see what he did to Razor? Perfect shot right through his gun hand." "Shut up," his partner snapped. "Just find the bastard so we can—" Marcus struck like a ghost. The first biker never saw him coming, just felt the precise pressure on his carotid artery that sent him into unconsciousness. The second spun around at his partner's muffled grunt, but Marcus was already moving. A quick strike to the solar plexus, followed by a knee to the temple. Both men were down in less than 5 seconds, their weapons stripped and disabled with practiced efficiency. 2 more sleeping," Marcus reported, zip-tying their hands. "These boys need better training." Tom's quiet chuckle came through the earpiece. "Not everyone had your instructors, boss." A pause. "Heads up, Callahan's organizing something at the south end. Looks like they're preparing Molotov cocktails." Marcus checked his watch. The sun was higher now, burning away the last of his cover fog. Time to change the game. Initiate Protocol 3. Across the farm, hidden speakers crackled to life. But instead of Marcus's voice, they played something else. The distinctive sound of police helicopters growing louder. The effect was immediate. Brotherhood members looked skyward, panic replacing aggression. "It's a trick!" Callahan shouted, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Reynolds is playing mind games." Marcus used their distraction to move closer to the barn. Through gaps in the wooden slats, he could see 3 bikers setting up a sniper position, unaware that they were silhouetted, perfectly against the morning light. "Tom, I count 3 rifles in the barn, high-powered." "Yeah, saw them bring those in, military grade, not your typical gang hardware." Marcus filed that detail away, another piece of the puzzle. These weren't just common thugs. Someone had supplied them with professional equipment. The first real surprise of the morning came from his left. A Brotherhood member emerged from behind a tractor, moving with trained precision. Marcus barely had time to dodge the knife that sliced through the air where his head had been. The fight was quick but intense. The biker knew his craft, military training, probably special forces. But Marcus hadn't earned his reputation by chance. A series of brutal exchanges ended with the man unconscious, but Marcus was now certain the Brotherhood had been prepared specifically for him. "Tom, our guests brought some interesting resumes with them." Notice that 2 of them moved like rangers when they tried to flank the silo. Almost had to get serious with them. A burst of gunfire interrupted their conversation. Callahan had lost patience, ordering his men to spray the farm buildings with automatic weapons. The sound of splintering wood and shattering glass filled the air. "That's just wasteful," Marcus muttered, triggering his next surprise. The farm's sprinkler system activated, but instead of water, it sprayed a mixture he'd prepared days ago. The liquid coated the ground, making it treacherously slick. Bikes that had been revving their engines suddenly lost traction, their riders cursing as they slid into each other. "Boss!" Diesel's voice carried across the chaos. "We've lost contact with Bravo team! 6 men just gone!" Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. Those 6 would wake up with massive headaches, zip-tied and stashed in his reinforced storm cellar. The Brotherhood was learning the hard way that numbers meant nothing against experience and preparation. "Reynolds!" Callahan's voice held a new note, not fear, but recognition. "Operation Crossfire wasn't just a mission, was it? It was a cover-up. Your wife found out what really happened in Damascus." Marcus froze. Damascus. The mission that had haunted his dreams. The operation that had made him retire. How could Callahan know about that? "Tom," his voice was deadly calm now, "I think it's time we had a proper conversation with Mr. Callahan." "Copy that, Shadow. Want me to arrange the meeting?" "Yes, let's show them why some ghosts should never be disturbed." The morning sun climbed higher over the Oklahoma farm, illuminating a battlefield where a simple gang raid had evolved into something far more complex. And somewhere in the chaos, Marcus Reynolds began moving toward answers he'd spent 3 years searching for, answers that might finally explain why his wife had really died on that mountain road. Noon approached, and the Oklahoma heat bore down on the battlefield the farm had become. Marcus watched through his scope as Callahan paced behind a makeshift barricade of overturned motorcycles, barking orders into a satellite phone. The gang leader's composure had cracked, replaced by barely contained fury. "I don't care what it costs," Callahan snarled into the phone. "Get everyone here and bring the heavy gear." He paused, listening. "Yes, the military-grade stuff. All of it." Tom's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece. "Got 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Look like gun trucks. These guys came prepared for a war." Marcus switched positions, moving through a hidden tunnel he'd built beneath the barn. "They're not the only ones. Time to wake up the farm's second line." "The Claymores?" "Not yet, but prep the det cord under the east field. If they're bringing in vehicles, let's control where they can drive. The gun trucks arrived in a roar of diesel engines, modified pickups with mounted weapons and steel-reinforced frames. The remaining Brotherhood members cheered as crates of weapons were unloaded. Marcus counted at least a dozen new arrivals, all moving with military precision. Tom, these aren't ordinary reinforcements. Watch their formation. Yeah, seeing it? Private military contractors, maybe? This is way above typical gang violence. Marcus's mind raced, connecting dots. Private military contractors, Operation Crossfire, Damascus, Mary's accident. The picture was becoming clearer, and he didn't like what he was seeing. A new voice boomed across the farm, amplified by professional-grade speakers. Marcus Reynolds, remember Sergeant Knox? Damascus, 2019, he sends his regards. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Knox had been his team's liaison in Damascus when everything went wrong. The mission that wasn't supposed to exist, the truth that was buried under layers of classified files. Tom, change of plans. These aren't just mercenaries, they're cleanup crew. The same ones from Damascus? Has to be. They're here to finish what they started. Marcus keyed his radio twice, activating his backup systems. Across the farm, hidden cameras began uploading their footage to secure servers. Evidence that couldn't be buried this time. The gun trucks began a coordinated advance, their mounted weapons spraying, suppressing fire across the farm buildings. These men knew how to hunt ghosts like Marcus, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail. This was his territory. Marcus triggered his first serious countermeasure. Shaped charges, carefully placed along the east field's perimeter, detonated in sequence. The explosions weren't meant to kill. Instead, they opened up hidden trenches, turning the flat farmland into an impassable maze of ditches. The lead truck swerved to avoid the sudden obstacles, its wheels catching the slick chemical mixture, still coating the ground. The vehicle rolled, taking out one of its companions in a crash of metal and curses. "Contact front!" one of the mercenaries shouted. "He's using Tier 1 tactics." "Because he is Tier 1, you idiots!" Callahan's voice held both rage and fear now. "Spread out, find his camera feeds, cut off his eyes." Marcus smiled grimly. They still didn't understand. The visible cameras were decoys. His real surveillance network was buried in the farm's infrastructure, as much a part of the land as the soil itself. "Tom, they're splitting up. Time for some precision work." "Copy that. I've got 4 targets moving into the kill zone." The morning's non-lethal approach was over. These men knew what they were walking into, knew what they'd done 3 years ago. The sound of Tom's rifle cracked across the farm. One of the mercenaries dropped, a clean shot through his weapon hand, still non-lethal, but much less gentle than before. "Reynolds!" The professional commander's voice held new respect. "That classified file your wife found? It's still out there. Stand down and we can talk terms." Marcus's blood ran cold. Mary hadn't died in an accident. She'd found something big enough to warrant a professional hit disguised as a car crash, and now they were here to clean up the loose ends. The farm's speakers crackled as Marcus finally responded, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a predator about to strike. "Let's talk about Damascus, about Knox, about why you killed my wife." He paused, letting them hear the steel in his words. "But first, let me show you what a ghost can do when he's fighting for the truth." The mercenaries realized too late that the morning's attacks had been Marcus pulling his punches. Now, as the Oklahoma sun reached its peak, the real battle was about to begin. The farm was about to become a graveyard of secrets, and Marcus Reynolds was ready to be the undertaker. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farm as Marcus moved through the underground tunnel network he'd spent years preparing. Above, he could hear the mercenaries' systematic sweep of his property, their boots crunching on the gravel as they hunted for him. "Got 4 teams," Tom reported quietly. 2 men each, moving in counterclockwise patterns. These boys know their business. So do we. Marcus reached a junction in the tunnels, checking his tactical pad. The farm's sensors painted a clear picture of the enemy movements. Time to introduce them to some old tricks. Protocol 7. Across the farm's speaker system, a new sound began playing. Recorded gunfire and explosions, precisely timed to create the illusion of a firefight on the western edge of the property. The mercenaries reacted instantly, 4 teams converging on the noise. Oldest trick in the book, Marcus muttered, emerging from a hidden hatch behind their position. The first 2 men never knew what hit them. Precise strikes to nerve clusters. Dropped them silently. Their radios crackled with coded responses they'd never send. "Charlie team, report status," the mercenary commander demanded. Silence answered him. "Charlie team, respond." Marcus was already moving, using the confusion to his advantage. He triggered a series of small explosions in the grain silo. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to draw attention. As predicted, 2 more teams rushed to investigate. "Tom, they're stacking up on your position." "Copy that. Time to introduce them to the auto turret?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Light 'em up." The modified farming equipment they'd installed in the silo whirred to life. Rubber bullets fired in precise bursts, catching the mercenaries in a devastating crossfire. Their professional training showed as they attempted to respond, but they were fighting against machines that didn't miss. "What the hell is this?" one of them shouted before a rubber round caught him in the chest, sending him sprawling. Through his scope, Marcus watched Callahan and the mercenary commander arguing intensely. The commander's gestures were becoming more agitated, his professional demeanor cracking. "Sir," a voice crackled through their comms, which Marcus had long since hacked. "These defenses, they're not civilian grade. This is stuff we used in—" "I know what it is," the commander snapped. "He's using our own playbook against us. Signal Knox. Tell him we need the package." Marcus's blood ran cold. Knox, the man who'd ordered the hit on Mary. "Tom, things are about to get real interesting. They're calling in their ace. Want me to take the shot on Callahan?" "Negative. He's our link to Knox. Keep him breathing." Marcus moved to his next position, triggering more of the farm's defenses. The irrigation pipes, now serving as improvised mortars, launched tear gas, canisters across the battlefield. The mercenaries scrambled for their gas masks, but Marcus was already among them. The fight was brutal and efficient. These weren't untrained bikers. These were professional killers. But Marcus had spent decades perfecting the art of close-quarter combat. 3 more went down in a flurry of strikes that targeted joints and pressure points. No killing blows, but they wouldn't be getting up any time soon. "Reynolds!" The commander's voice held a new edge of desperation. "That file your wife found, it goes all the way to the top. You really want to know why Knox ordered the hit?" Marcus triggered another series of explosions, herding the remaining forces into a tight cluster. "Oh, I intend to find out, starting with you." The commander's laugh was hollow. "You think this is about money? Power? It's bigger than that. Damascus was just the beginning. What your wife discovered—" A single shot rang out, and the commander dropped, clutching his shoulder. Tom's voice came through calm and clear. He was reaching for a detonator. "Looks like our friends brought some serious hardware." Marcus surveyed the farm through his tactical feed. 8 mercenaries down, 6 more in various states of injury or unconsciousness. Callahan and 3 others remained, now bunkered behind the reinforced trucks. "Sir," one of the mercs called out, "Knox is 10 minutes out, black helicopter coming in hot." "Good," Marcus replied, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "I've been waiting 3 years to have a chat with Knox." He switched to his private channel with Tom. "You getting all this recorded?" "Every second, already uploaded to 3 separate secure servers. Whatever they're trying to bury, it won't stay buried this time." The afternoon sun began its descent, casting an orange glow over the farm-turned war zone. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors began beating the air. Marcus Reynolds checked his weapons, rolled his shoulders, and prepared for the next phase of the battle. Knox was coming, and with him the truth about Mary's death. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors grew louder as Marcus made his final preparations. He moved through the darkness with practiced ease, his night vision equipment revealing the farm in shades of green. "Contact!" Tom's voice whispered through the radio. "Black Hawk, no markings. Military-grade equipment on board. These aren't regular contractors anymore." The helicopter's searchlight swept across the farm, illuminating the aftermath of the day's battle. Overturned vehicles, unconscious bodies, and the scars of explosion marks told the story of a fight gone terribly wrong for the attackers. "Reynolds!" A new voice boomed across the property, cold, professional, commanding. "Still the same ghost I remember from Damascus, though I have to say, your wife was easier to handle." Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon. Knox, the man who'd ordered Mary's death. "He's trying to bait you," Tom cautioned. "Got eyes on 4. More teams deploying from the chopper. Night ops gear top of the line." "Good." Marcus's voice was ice. "Let's show them how we own the dark." The farm's defense system shifted to its nighttime configuration. IR strobes, invisible to the naked eye but blinding through night vision goggles, began pulsing at random intervals. The mercenaries' curses confirmed their equipment was being rendered useless. Knox's laugh echoed across the speakers. "Clever. Mary was clever too, finding those shipping manifests, connecting the dots about what really happened in Damascus. About the weapons we sold, the deals we made. She just couldn't leave well enough alone." Marcus triggered the farm's night defenses. Hidden panels in the ground opened, releasing a thick blanket of smoke that hugged the earth. Through his thermal scope, he watched the new teams try to maintain formation as their visibility dropped to 0. "You know what your problem is, Knox?" Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice emanating from multiple speakers. "You still think this is a tactical situation. But this?" He paused as another explosion rocked the northern perimeter. "This is personal." The night erupted into chaos. Marcus moved like a phantom through his own carefully prepared killing ground. The mercenaries were good, exceptional even, but they were fighting a man who had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this moment. "Sir," one of the operators called out, "we've lost contact with teams 2 and 3. Knox's response was cut off by the sound of Sarah's voice, broadcasting clearly through the farm's speakers. "Dad! I found it. Mum's backup files. Everything about Operation Crossfire. About the weapons sales, the human trafficking. It's all here." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. His daughter had inherited her mother's investigative skills and his tactical mind. She wasn't really at the farm. The recording was part of his psychological warfare. But the effect on Knox was immediate. "Find that girl," Knox roared. "Burn everything. No evidence leaves this farm." "Tom, already sending the files to our contacts. Let's see Knox bury this one." The night vision advantage was now completely Marcus's. The farm he'd spent years memorizing became a maze of death for the invaders. Each corner held a new trap. Each shadow concealed another surprise. "You know what the real irony is, Knox?" Marcus's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "If you'd left Mary alone, her investigation would have died in bureaucracy. But killing her, that made it personal. That made me look closer." A burst of gunfire answered him, mercenaries shooting at shadows. Their professional demeanor was cracking, the weight of fighting an invisible enemy taking its toll. "Last chance, Reynolds." Knox's voice held a hint of desperation now. "Walk away. There's still a deal to be made." "A deal?" Marcus moved silently behind Knox's position. "Like the deal you made in Damascus, selling weapons to both sides, trafficking innocent people through the war zones?" "It was business, nothing personal. You made it personal when you killed my wife." The night was now fully dark, but for Marcus it was as clear as day. Through his thermal scope, he could see Knox barking orders, surrounded by his remaining guards. The helicopter's searchlight swept back and forth, searching desperately for any sign of movement. But Marcus Reynolds had become one with the darkness. The ghost of Delta Force was about to show Knox why some secrets are better left buried, and why some men should never be pushed past their breaking point. The night had become a symphony of chaos, gunfire, explosions, and the constant thrum of the helicopter's blades. Through it all, Marcus moved like a wraith, systematically dismantling Knox's defensive perimeter. The truth about Operation Crossfire was finally within his grasp. "Tom, status?" Marcus whispered, pressing himself against the barn's wall as another searchlight swept past overhead. A burst of suppressive fire answered before Tom could respond. "Taking heat from the North Ridge. These boys found my backup position." Sound of breaking glass crackled through the radio. "Had to relocate, but you'll love this." Just decrypted another chunk of Mary's files. Knox's voice boomed across the battlefield. "You think you know what happened in Damascus? Your wife barely scratched the surface." A series of explosions rocked the western edge of the farm. "We didn't just sell weapons, Reynolds. We sold entire wars." Marcus processed this as he moved through the shadows. Mary had always been brilliant. It's why she'd become one of the DoD's top forensic accountants. She hadn't just stumbled onto a weapons deal. She'd discovered something much darker. "Knox," Marcus replied, his voice echoing from multiple speakers. "Remember Staff Sergeant Chen, the witness you made disappear in Damascus?" The helicopter's searchlight froze. For the first time, uncertainty crept into Knox's voice. "How did you do?" "Mary found him. Found the payments to his family. Found everything." Marcus triggered another series of charges, herding Knox's men exactly where he wanted them. "She built the entire case before you killed her. Every transaction, every shell company, every body you buried." Tom's voice cut in urgently. "Marcus, you need to hear this. The files, they're not just about weapons. Operation Crossfire was a pipeline. They were staging conflicts, selling arms to both sides, then trafficking refugees through the chaos." The pieces clicked into place. Mary hadn't just discovered war profiteering. She'd uncovered an industrial-scale human trafficking operation hidden behind manufactured conflicts. The realization made Marcus's blood boil. "Your wife was a real problem solver," Knox shouted, trying to maintain control of his fracturing operation, "right up until her brakes mysteriously failed on that mountain road." A new sound cut through the darkness. Police sirens in the distance. Knox's men tensed visibly through Marcus's thermal scope. "Those would be the FBI's anti-trafficking task force," Marcus said calmly. "Mary's files finished uploading to them about 10 minutes ago, along with everything that's happened here tonight." "You're bluffing." But Knox's voice had lost its edge. "Those files died with her." "Did they? Check your phone, Knox. Check what's trending on every major news network right now." The sound of multiple phones chiming cut through the night. Knox's cursing told Marcus that Tom had done his job. The evidence was out, impossible to contain. "It's over." Marcus projected his voice across the farm. "Every contract, every shell company, every deal you made. Mary's death bought you 3 years, but her investigation never stopped. It just changed hands." "Kill him!" Knox screamed, his composure finally shattering. "Burn it all!" The night erupted into full chaos. Knox's remaining men opened up with everything they had, their tracers cutting bright lines through the darkness. But in their panic, they'd forgotten the first rule of night operations. Firing gave away their positions. "Tom, you got what we need? Everything's backed up and distributed. Ghost protocol activated. We're clear to end this." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. "Then let's finish what Mary started." The farm's final defensive measures activated. Years of planning. of preparing for exactly this moment came to fruition. The irrigation system sprayed aviation fuel across pre-selected zones. Claymore mines, carefully positioned, waited for Marcus's signal. "You know what your biggest mistake was, Knox?" Marcus's voice was deadly calm now. "You thought killing Mary would bury the truth, but all it did was give me a reason to dig it up." Through his scope, Marcus watched Knox frantically trying to coordinate his remaining forces, not realizing he was being maneuvered into a trap 3 years in the making. The ghost of Delta Force was about to show them why some men should never be crossed, and why some vengeance is worth waiting for. Marcus's radio crackled with sudden urgency. "Shadow, we've got a problem." Tom's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Just intercepted a call from the sheriff's department. Deputy Rogers is heading to your sister-in-law's house. He's working." And for Knox, the revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Rogers, the deputy who'd handled Mary's accident investigation, who'd been first on the scene that night, who'd declared the brake lines had failed due to poor maintenance. "Sarah," Marcus breathed, his tactical mind already racing through scenarios. "Tom, can you reach her?" "Trying. Signals being jammed." Knox brought some serious electronic warfare gear with that chopper. Around him, the battle for the farm continued. To rage, Knox's men had set up defensive positions around their remaining vehicles, trying to establish a secure perimeter. They didn't realize they were exactly where Marcus wanted them. "Claire's house is 20 minutes out," Marcus calculated, checking his tactical pad. "Rogers will be there in 10. "Go!" Tom's voice was firm. "I've got enough toys here to keep our friends busy. Sarah needs you more." Marcus was already moving, but Knox's voice boomed across the battlefield. "Running away, Shadow. What happened to finishing what Mary started?" "Tom, initiate Protocol 9. Full automated defense, and send the signal." "Copy that. Good hunting." "Boss." Marcus triggered a series of explosions on the farm's eastern perimeter, his prepared exit strategy. As Knox's men turned to face the new threat, he slipped through a hidden tunnel that led to his underground garage. The reinforced door slid open, revealing a matte black motorcycle, specially modified for situations exactly like this. "Reynolds is running," Knox shouted over the gunfire. "Find him! Don't let him—" The rest was drowned out by a massive explosion. Through his tactical pad, Marcus watched as Tom triggered the farm's automated defense systems. Sentry guns emerged from hidden positions. Pre-programmed drones launched from concealed hangars. The entire property transformed into an autonomous war zone. But Marcus's mind was already 20 minutes ahead, mapping out the fastest route to Claire's house. The motorcycle roared to life as another explosion lit up the night behind him. His radio crackled one last time. Shadow got a burst transmission from Sarah before the jamming hit. 2 words. "Mom's locket." Marcus's heart raced. The locket, Mary's last gift to their daughter. The one she'd been wearing earlier that day. The one that looked exactly like... It's a hard drive, he realized. Mary gave Sarah a backup of everything. The motorcycle shot through the hidden tunnel's exit, emerging a quarter-mile from the farm. Behind him, the sound of combat continued, but ahead, a more personal battle waited. Rogers wasn't just going to Claire's house to capture Sarah. He was going to destroy the final piece of evidence, the proof Mary had hidden in plain sight for 3 years. Through his earpiece, he could hear fragments of radio traffic through the jamming. "Deputy en route. Nice, secure the package." No witnesses. The motorcycle ate up the dark Oklahoma roads as Marcus pushed it to its limits. In his mind, he could see Mary's face the last time he'd seen her alive. She'd been worried about something, distracted. Now he knew why. She'd known they were coming for her, had prepared one final failsafe. "I'm coming, Sarah," he whispered into the wind. "Hold on." Behind him, a new series of explosions lit up the night sky. Tom was keeping his promise, ensuring Knox and his men wouldn't be following, but ahead, a different kind of battle waited. not against trained mercenaries or corrupt contractors, but against a trusted local lawman who'd betrayed everything his badge stood for. Deputy Rogers was about to learn why Marcus Reynolds had earned the call sign Shadow, and why a father protecting his daughter was more dangerous than any soldier he'd ever been. The motorcycle's engine growled as Marcus took another turn at dangerous speed, eating up the dark country roads. Through his earpiece, he could hear the ongoing battle at the farm, Tom orchestrating a symphony of automated defenses that kept Knox's forces pinned down. Shadow update. Tom's voice cut through static. Knox is trying to disengage. Looks like Rogers' mission just became priority 1. Marcus's jaw clenched. They're figuring out what's in the locket. Got 2 vehicles. Breaking off from the farm. Heading your way. Time estimate? 15 minutes minimum. Rogers is still ahead of them. Marcus pushed the bike harder, taking risks he normally wouldn't. In his mind, he could see the route Rogers would take, the deputy's familiarity with local roads giving him an advantage. Unless... Tom, remember that old logging road we mapped? The one that cuts behind Miller's Creek? A chuckle came through the static. Taking the ghost route, eh? That'll shave 5 minutes if you don't break your neck. Marcus turned sharply, the bike nearly horizontal as he cut onto a narrow dirt path. Tree branches whipped past his helmet as he navigated the treacherous terrain. But every second counted. Rogers was a local, but Marcus had spent 3 years mapping every possible escape and intercept route within 50 miles of the farm. His tactical pad beeped, movement at Claire's house. Security cameras he'd secretly installed months ago showed Rogers' patrol car pulling up, lights off. The deputy stepped out, adjusting his tactical vest. Not standard police issue. "Sarah, Claire, don't answer the door," Marcus whispered, knowing. They'd follow the protocols he'd drilled into them. But Rogers wasn't planning to knock. The motorcycle burst out of the woods near Claire's house, just as Rogers was preparing to breach the back door. The deputy spun at the sound, his hand moving. To his weapon, Reynolds. Rogers' voice carried fake concern. "Thank God! We got reports of—" Marcus didn't slow down. The motorcycle launched over Claire's garden wall, catching Rogers completely off guard. Both men went down in a controlled crash, rolling across the lawn. Marcus's years of combat training took over, turning the fall into an attack. Rogers was good. His response proved he was more than a corrupt cop. Military training showed in how he broke his fall, came up shooting, but Marcus was better. 3 shots cracked through the night. Rogers's bullets hit empty air as Marcus flowed like a shadow, closing the distance. The fight was brief but brutal. Rogers had skills, but Marcus had something more, the cold fury of a father protecting his child. "Knox sent you to clean up Mary's investigation," Marcus growled, pinning the deputy down. "You were supposed to make sure nothing survived." Rogers spat blood, his training showing in his defiance. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Reynolds. This goes higher than Knox, higher than you can imagine." "Dad!" Sarah's voice called from the house. "We've got company!" Headlights appeared at the end of the street, Knox's reinforcements arriving ahead of schedule. They'd taken an unexpected route. "Tom?" Marcus keyed his radio. "Status?" "Farm's secure. Knox is trapped, but he's got a satellite link. He's calling in something big." Marcus zip-tied Rogers, securing him to Claire's porch railing. "Sarah, you got the locket?" "Right here." She emerged from the house, Claire beside her, both carrying go-bags. Good girls. They'd remembered the evacuation protocols. "Claire, your panic room. Now!" Marcus checked his weapons as his sister-in-law and daughter moved to safety. The approaching vehicles were tactical, armored SUVs with reinforced bumpers and weapons mounted behind the windshields. "Tom, remember Sarajevo? The trick with the tree line? Already uploading targeting data to your tactical pad. Just like old times, boss." Marcus smiled grimly as he positioned himself in the shadows. Rogers had brought Knox's men right where he wanted them, into a prepared kill zone he'd spent months setting up around his family's backup location. "Sarah, He spoke softly into his radio. "Remember what Mom always said about the truth?" Her voice came back strong and clear. "The truth doesn't hide in darkness. It waits for someone brave enough to bring it into the light. That's my girl." Marcus checked his tactical pad one last time. "Time to finish what your mother started." The SUVs were almost in position. In moments, Knox's men would learn that threatening Marcus Reynolds' family was more than a tactical mistake. It was an excuse for a ghost to remind the world why some shadows are best left undisturbed. Claire's property transformed into a war zone as the armored SUVs took tactical positions. Marcus watched through his thermal scope as 12 heavily armed men deployed in textbook formation. These weren't Knox's regular mercenaries. Their movement spoke of Black Ops training. "Tom, you seeing this?" Crystal clear through the surveillance net. "These boys move like unit operators." Tier 1. Marcus's mind raced through scenarios. Elite operators meant the stakes had just risen dramatically. What's happening at the farm? Knox is coordinating something big. Intercepted fragments of communication. They're calling it Protocol Omega. From his hidden position in the tree line, Marcus watched the tactical team begin their sweep. Their night vision equipment was top tier, but he'd prepared for this. Infrared strobes, carefully hidden months ago, began pulsing at random intervals, creating false signatures. "Reynolds!" A commanding voice cut through the night. "By now you know this is bigger than Knox, bigger than Damascus. Give us the locket and this ends tonight." Inside Claire's panic room, Sarah's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. "Dad, I got the locket's drive decrypted." "Mom, she found something called Project Eclipse. It's not just weapons and trafficking. They're destabilizing entire regions." Marcus processed this as he moved silently through his prepared positions. Mary hadn't just uncovered a criminal enterprise. She'd found evidence of something that could reshape global politics. "Tom, how long can you hold Knox? The farm's automated defenses are keeping them contained, but they're coordinating with these new players. Whatever Protocol Omega is, it's coming soon." The tactical team was moving closer, their sweep pattern professional but predictable. They were looking for a desperate father, not realizing they were walking into a trap set by someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. Deputy Rogers, still secured to the porch, began laughing. "You don't get it, do you, Reynolds? Project Eclipse isn't just an operation, it's the future. Controlled chaos, engineered conflicts, all generating billions in profit." "And Mary threatened to expose it all," Marcus replied. Triggering his first counterattack, hidden speakers across the property activated, broadcasting a cacophony of combat sounds. The tactical team's formation wavered as they tried to identify real threats from false ones. Marcus used their moment of confusion to move. "Sarah, Claire, initiate Protocol Echo. Head for the secondary safe house." "But Dad, trust me, sweetheart, just like Mom did." Through his tactical pad, Marcus watched as Sarah and Claire accessed the hidden tunnel beneath the panic room, an escape route he'd spent months preparing. At the same time, Tom's voice came through with new urgency. "Knox is mobile. They've breached the farm's eastern perimeter. 2 helicopters incoming, heavily armed. Time to impact, 15 minutes. The tactical team's leader was adapting quickly, reorganizing his men to deal with Marcus's psychological warfare. "Fan out! He's playing games. Find the girl and the locket." Marcus smiled grimly. They still didn't understand. This wasn't about escaping or surviving. This was about bringing everything into the light. "Tom, remember that contingency we discussed? The one Mary helped set up, the dead man's switch, already armed. If anything happens to you or Sarah, every server in the world gets Mary's files. No going back." The night was about to become very interesting. Knox's helicopters were inbound, an elite tactical team was closing in, and somewhere in the darkness, a ghost was preparing to reveal why some secrets are worth dying for. And some truths are worth killing for. One last dance, Marcus whispered, checking his weapons. The thunder of approaching helicopters mixed with the sounds of combat from his speakers, creating a symphony of chaos. But beneath it all, he could almost hear Mary's voice. The truth doesn't hide in darkness. It waits for someone brave enough to bring it into the light. The storm was about to break, and Marcus Reynolds was ready to become the lightning. The helicopter's searchlights cut through the darkness like angry eyes as Knox's reinforcements approached. Marcus had positioned himself perfectly, a shadow within shadows, waiting for the right moment. The tactical team was spreading out, their frustration growing as his psychological warfare took its toll. "Boss," Tom's voice crackled through the encrypted channel. "Knox just received new orders. They're initiating Protocol Omega ahead of schedule." As if on cue, the tactical team's leader barked new commands. "Burn it all, no evidence, no witnesses." The first incendiary round struck Claire's house, flames erupting from the impact points. They didn't know Sarah and Claire were already gone. Moving through underground tunnels, Marcus had spent months preparing. "They're getting sloppy," Marcus observed, watching through his thermal scope as the team's disciplined formation began to break down. "Tom, what's your status?" "Farm's defense systems are giving Knox hell, but these choppers are bringing something new. Military-grade EMP devices. They're trying to blind us." Marcus processed this information as he moved. The tactical team's superior numbers meant nothing now. They were operating on his terms, in his killing ground. Every tree, every shadow had been prepared for this moment. The first trap triggered spectacularly. Pressure plates beneath the soil activated, sending columns of thick smoke into the air. The team's night vision became worse than useless. There, expensive equipment, transforming the smoke into impenetrable white walls. "Contact front!" one of them shouted, firing at shadows Marcus had programmed his strobes to create. The disciplined operators were rapidly losing their edge, fighting an enemy they couldn't see or understand. "Reynolds!" Knox's voice boomed from the approaching helicopters. "Project Eclipse goes all the way to the top. Presidents, prime ministers, you think your wife's evidence can touch them?" Marcus triggered his next sequence of traps. Shaped charges, carefully placed, detonated in sequence, creating a maze of fire and debris that separated the tactical team into smaller, more manageable groups. "You still don't understand," Marcus replied, his voice emanating from multiple speakers. "This was never about touching them. This was about exposing them." Sarah's voice cut through his private channel. "Dad, we're clear of the kill zone. But Mom's files, they show Project Eclipse has sleeper agents in every major government. They're planning simultaneous coups in 12 countries. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Mary hadn't just uncovered corruption. She discovered a plan to reshape the global order itself. Tom, new priority. How fast can you upload? Already on it, boss. Dead Man's switch is being modified. If they take us down, this goes to every intelligence agency and news outlet. On Earth, the helicopters were closing fast, their weapons pointed at the burning property. Marcus could see Knox in the lead chopper, his face illuminated by instrument panels. The man who'd ordered Mary's death was finally within reach. "You can't stop this, Reynolds," Knox shouted over the radio. "Project Eclipse launches in 6 hours. Even if you survive, the world you wake up to won't be the same." Marcus smiled grimly as he triggered his final defensive line. Hidden anti-aircraft. Measures, non-lethal but effective, launched volleys of specialized rounds. The helicopter's electronics sparked and failed, forcing them to pull back or risk falling from the sky. Sarah, Claire's panic room was just the beginning. "Wasn't it?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer. "Your mother left more than just evidence in that locket." "She left instructions, Dad. Names, dates, security codes. Everything needed to stop Project Eclipse before it starts." The night erupted into chaos as Knox's helicopters made emergency landings and the tactical team regrouped for a final push. But Marcus Reynolds wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the truth Mary had died to protect, for the future she'd tried to preserve. "Tom, you got what we need?" "Affirmative. Sarah's data is secured and uploading. Knox's team is about to have a very bad night." Marcus checked his weapons one last time as Knox and his men prepared for their final assault. The truth about Project Eclipse was about to see daylight, and no amount of tactical teams or corrupt officials could stop it. "Mary always said the truth was like a sword," Marcus whispered, moving into position. "It cuts both ways." The night was about to become a legend. The story of how a ghost, a grieving husband, and a daughter's love brought down an empire of shadows. Knox and his men were about to learn why some secrets are better left buried, and why a Delta Force operator protecting his family's legacy is the deadliest force on Earth. Knox hit the ground running as his helicopter made an emergency landing, barking orders to his remaining men. The tactical team had regrouped, their earlier precision replaced by desperate aggression. Through his scope, Marcus counted 15. Operators plus Knox, all of them converging on his position with lethal intent. "Tom, status on the upload? 30% complete. Every intelligence agency worldwide is about to have a very interesting morning briefing." Marcus triggered his final defensive measure. The grounds around Claire's property had been prepared for exactly this scenario. Hidden sprinklers activated, but instead of water, they sprayed a carefully mixed chemical compound. The liquid ignited, on contact with the air, creating a maze of controlled fire barriers. "What the hell is this?" one of the operators shouted as flames erupted around them. "This is what happens when you give a Delta Force operator 3 years to prepare," Marcus replied, his voice echoing from multiple speakers. "Mary taught me something important about preparation, about patience." Knox's response was immediate and violent. "Kill him! Burn everything!" The night erupted into chaos. Marcus moved like a ghost through his prepared battleground, decades of combat experience flowing through every motion. The first 2 operators never saw him coming. Precise strikes. To nerve clusters dropped them silently. "Boss!" Tom's voice carried urgent warning. "Second wave incoming! Local police! But they're not ours! Protocol Omega's reach runs deep!" Sarah's voice cut through the tactical channel. "Dad, Mum's files show Knox isn't the top. There's someone else, someone called the Director." Marcus processed this as he engaged 3 more operators. The fight was brutal but brief. Years of close-quarter combat training giving him the edge. The Director? Some kind of shadow commander. Mum traced payments from a black fund. "Billions of dollars, Dad. They're not just planning coups, they're buying entire governments." A bullet whizzed past Marcus's head as Knox himself joined the fight. The man moved with lethal precision, his own special forces background evident in every motion. "You're too late, Reynolds. Protocol Omega is already in motion." The 2 men crashed together in a fury of strikes and counters. Knox was good, exceptionally good, but Marcus had spent 3 years focusing his skills toward this exact moment. Their fight became a deadly dance through flames and shadows. "Tom, upload status?" 60%. "But we've got company at the farm. Heavy vehicles, military grade." Marcus blocked Knox's knife strike, countering with an elbow that sent the man staggering. "Hold position, keep that upload going." The tactical team was trying to flank him, but they'd lost their cohesion. Marcus's preparations had transformed the battlefield into a psychological maze. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every step could trigger a new trap. "Dad!" Sarah's voice held a new urgency. "Mom's final entry. She found something about the Director. A name, General William Harrison." Knox's laugh was hollow as he recovered his stance. "Now you understand how deep this goes, how many powerful people will die to keep this secret." "The only one dying tonight is you," Marcus growled, launching. A devastating combination of strikes. Knox countered the first two, but the third slipped through, followed by a fourth that sent him crashing to the ground. "Upload at 80%, Tom reported, but the military vehicles, they're not regular army, black ops, the director's personal cleanup crew." Marcus secured Knox with practiced efficiency, zip ties ensuring the man wouldn't interfere further. "Sarah, get that name to every contact we have. Military, intelligence, media, everyone." "Already done, Dad." Mum's distribution list was extensive. The remaining tactical team members had taken defensive positions, but their earlier confidence was shattered. They'd come expecting to overwhelm a retired operator. Instead, they'd walked into a trap 3 years in the making. "Your wife died." "For nothing." Knox spat blood as Marcus secured him. "The director will bury this, bury you, bury everything." Marcus allowed himself a cold smile. "That's where you're wrong. Mary didn't die for nothing. She died for the truth, and tonight, that truth burns everything you built to the ground." "Upload complete." Tom's voice held fierce triumph. "Every server, every agency. It's all out there now, boss. No going back." The sound of approaching vehicles filled the night, but these weren't the director's forces. Multiple radio frequencies crackled to life as federal agencies responded to Mary's evidence. The truth was out, and no amount of black ops teams or shadow directors could contain it. "This is the FBI Anti-Corruption Task Force," a voice boomed through professional-grade speakers. "The property is surrounded. All armed personnel, stand down." Marcus watched as Knox's remaining men dropped their weapons, their will to fight evaporating as they realized the scope of what had just happened. Project Eclipse, the director, the entire shadow network, it was all exposed. "Mary always said the truth was like a tide," Marcus told Knox as federal agents swarmed the property. "You can hold it back for a while, but eventually it sweeps everything away." The night had become morning, and with the dawn came the light. Mary had died, trying to shine on the darkness. Marcus Reynolds hadn't just avenged his wife. He'd completed her mission. The ghost had become a beacon, turning shadows into light. The morning sun cast long shadows across Claire's property as federal agents processed the scene. Marcus sat on the porch steps, watching as Knox and his men were led away in handcuffs. Sarah had emerged from the safe tunnel, now sitting beside. Her father, her mother's locket held tightly in her hands. "Mom knew, didn't she?" Sarah's voice was soft. "She knew they were coming for her that night." Marcus nodded, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "That's why she gave you the locket. She knew you'd understand its importance when the time was right." Tom approached, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His face showed the fatigue of the night's battle, but his eyes held satisfaction. "Just got word from our contacts. General Harrison, the director, was arrested an hour ago. Seems Mary's evidence was pretty comprehensive." "She always was thorough," Marcus smiled, remembering his wife's attention to detail. The accountant who brought down an empire. Federal agents were already rebuilding the timeline. Mary's investigation, her strategic placement of evidence, the network of allies she'd cultivated, all of it leading to this morning. Project Eclipse had been exposed, its architects arrested, its shadow structure dragged into the light. Deputy Rogers was led past, them in chains, his earlier bravado replaced by defeated silence. The local law enforcement connection was just one thread in a vast tapestry of corruption that Mary had meticulously mapped out. "The farm?" Marcus asked, looking at Tom. "Standing. Bit shot up, but nothing we can't fix." Tom grinned. "Though, I think we might need to explain some of our security measures to the FBI." Sarah stood, walking to the garden where the morning glories Mary had planted were beginning to bloom. She used to say that truth and justice were like her flowers. They just needed the right conditions to grow. Marcus joined his daughter, seeing Mary in her stance, her determination. Your mother's last gift wasn't just evidence, Sarah. It was a legacy, a reminder that one person with courage can change everything. Claire emerged from the house carrying coffee for everyone. The morning felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from all their shoulders. The truth about Mary's death had finally been revealed, and with it, the massive conspiracy she died exposing. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, looking at the federal agents documenting Knox's elaborate operation. Marcus thought about the farm, about the life he and Mary had built, about the future they'd dreamed of for their daughter. "We rebuild. We plant new gardens. We keep shining light into dark places." Tom raised his coffee cup. "To Mary Reynolds. The accountant who took down the bad guys." "To Mom," Sarah added softly. Marcus held his daughter close as the sun rose higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Mary's killers were facing justice, her evidence was changing the world, and her family was safe. Sometimes he realized the greatest victories aren't won with weapons, but with truth, patience, and love. "Come on," he said finally. "Let's go. Home. We've got a farm to rebuild." As they drove back toward their property, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. The ghost of Delta Force was still there, but now he was something more, a father who'd protected his family, a husband who'd honored his wife's legacy, and a man who'd helped bring light to the darkness. Mary would have liked that. She always did prefer the dawn.